Single dad walked into the wrong room and discovered a secret that changed his life. Marcus Webb was already 6 minutes late when the cupcake box started to tilt. He had one hand on the cupcake box, one hand on his phone, his jacket half-zipped, and his car keys gripped between his teeth. The hallway of Clover Ridge Elementary was packed with parents, grandparents, and little kids in white-collared shirts, all moving in the same direction, all moving faster than him. His daughter Nadia was backstage somewhere getting her violin ready, and Marcus had promised he would not be late again. He had promised this 3 times in the last month. He was about to break that promise for the 4th time. He took the stairs instead of waiting for the elevator. Bad idea. The stairwell echoed, smelled like gym shoes and old paint, and a woman carrying a flower arrangement the size of a small tree nearly knocked him flat on the second landing. He pressed himself against the wall. The cupcakes tilted. He caught them. He kept moving. Room 212. He had written it on his hand in blue pen that morning because he absolutely knew, he would forget it by evening. He looked at his hand now. The pen had smeared during the drive over when he'd grabbed his coffee cup. What was left looked like a bruise more than a number. He thought it said 212. He pushed through a door on the 2nd floor, turned left, walked fast, found a door, and shoved it open. The room was not full of 9-year-olds in white shirts. It was full of adults sitting in folding chairs arranged in a wide circle. 12 people, maybe 13. A woman with short gray hair and a paper coffee cup in her hands was mid-sentence. She did not stop speaking. She did not even flinch. She just looked at Marcus the way someone looks at a fly that has entered through an open window and kept talking. Marcus stopped breathing. Every other person in the circle turned to look at him, not with anger, not with annoyance, with the particular expression of people who had seen worse interruptions than a man with a cupcake box and car keys in his teeth. He pulled the keys from his mouth. "Sorry," he said. "Wrong room." He was already starting to back out when the man sitting closest to the door, older, probably in his 60s, reading glasses on a beaded chain around his neck, the kind of man who looked like he had been calm for 30 consecutive years, looked up at him and said simply, "Pull up a chair." Marcus blinked. "I'm in the wrong room." The man nodded once, slowly, like he had heard this before, like he had heard this from every single person currently sitting in that circle. "Most of us were," the man said. Marcus stood in the doorway for exactly 3 seconds. He counted them without meaning to. Then one of the cupcakes on the top tray slid sideways, hit the edge of the box, and fell. It landed frosting side down on the linoleum floor with a small, definitive sound. 11 people watched it happen. Nobody said anything. Marcus looked down at the cupcake. He looked back up at the room. Something in his chest moved in a way it had not moved in a very long time, a kind of pressure, like something trying to get out. He laughed. Not a polite laugh, not the kind he used at work when his coworker Gary made a joke that didn't land. A real laugh, short and sudden, the kind that comes from somewhere below the ribs. It surprised him. He could not remember the last time he had been surprised by his own laugh. The woman with the gray hair smiled at him. She did not stop her sentence to do it. She just smiled and kept talking, and Marcus stood there another second holding a tilting box of cupcakes over a ruined one on the floor, and then he quietly pulled the door shut behind him and found the stairwell again. Room 212 was 1 floor up. He figured that out 45 seconds later. Nadia was already on stage when he slipped through the back door of the auditorium. She was the 4th child in the row, her violin under her chin, her hair in the braids he had done himself that morning, uneven but holding. She had not spotted him yet. He found a spot along the side wall, pulled out his phone, and started filming. He propped it sideways the way he always did, even though the video always came out the wrong shape, because he could never remember to rotate it until it was too late. The music started. Nadia played. She was good, better than good, actually. Her teacher, a patient woman named Laura who had the energy of someone who had once wanted to be a concert violinist and had made peace with not being one, had said last week that Nadia had a natural feel for tempo. Marcus had not known what to say to that. He'd said thank you. He'd thought later, sitting in the parking lot outside the school, that Claire would have known exactly what to say. Claire always knew what to say to teachers, to other parents, to strangers at parties, to the woman at the grocery store who was having a hard day. She had a way of making people feel like the thing they had just said was the most interesting thing anyone had said all week. He felt the back of his throat tighten and looked down at his phone screen. Nadia's bow moved. He did not let himself finish the thought. The recital lasted 45 minutes. Marcus stood the whole time, phone out, filming in the wrong orientation, and when the kids took their bow at the end and the parents around him clapped, he clapped too, and the woman next to him, a grandmother with 3 flower stem bracelets on her wrist, leaned over and said, "Which one is yours?" And he pointed to Nadia and the grandmother said, "Oh, she's wonderful," and Marcus said, "Yeah, she is." He said it straight, no performance in it. She was. Nadia found him near the back door after, still carrying her violin case, her braids slightly looser than they'd been an hour ago. She looked at him the way she always looked at him after a recital, like she was checking, making sure he was okay. She was 9 years old and she was checking on him. He hated that. He hated it the way you hate something that is also the most important thing in the world to you. "You were late," she said. "I was 6 minutes late." 7. "I brought cupcakes." She looked at the box, then at the empty space where one cupcake had been. What happened to that one? Marcus thought about the linoleum floor, about 12 adults in folding chairs, about a laugh that had come out of him like something breaking loose from a wall. "It fell," he said. Nadia accepted this. She took the box from him and opened it on the drive home, picking the one with the most sprinkles, eating it with the focused attention she gave to everything she cared about. She asked him why his jacket smelled like coffee. He told her he'd spilled some on the way in. She told him he should get a travel mug with a better lid. He told her she was right. They drove home through streets that were blue dark and quiet, the kind of evening that had always felt to Marcus like something was ending rather than beginning. He used to hate that feeling. He had stopped minding it. There was something easier about an evening that did not pretend to be anything more than what it was. Nadia fell asleep on the couch 20 minutes after they got home, still in her white recital shirt, her violin case on the floor beside her. Marcus covered her with the blanket from the back of the couch, the old one, the gray one, the one that had been in their house longer than Nadia had, and stood there a moment looking at her. She slept the way her mother had slept, still, certain, like sleep was not something that happened to her but something she had decided to do completely. He went to the kitchen, he made himself a cup of tea he did not drink. He sat at the table and opened his phone and, without entirely meaning to, typed into the search bar, Grief Support Group, Columbus, Ohio. He stared at the results. There were 7 listings. Community centers, church basements, a hospital wing on the east side, and one that simply said, Tuesday Evening Support Group, Clover Ridge Community Room, Room 112, meeting weekly for 11 years. Room 112. He sat with that for a long moment. He closed the tab. He went to bed. He lay on his side of the mattress, which was still his side even though there was no other side anymore, and he stared at the ceiling and thought about the woman with the gray hair who had not stopped talking when he walked in. He thought about the old man with the reading glasses. He thought about the cupcake on the floor, the frosting crushed flat against the linoleum, 12 people watching it happen and no one saying a word. He thought about the laugh, where it had come from, what it had moved on its way out. He did not open the tab again that night. But he thought about it until he fell asleep, and in the morning, when he unlocked his phone to check the weather, the search bar still had the words in it, waiting. He left them there. The Tuesday after the recital, Marcus did not go to room 112. He had a good reason. He always had a good reason. That particular Tuesday, it was a burst pipe under the kitchen sink, which he discovered at 6 in the morning when he stepped onto wet linoleum in his socks. He spent the morning on the phone with a plumber named Stan who could not come until the afternoon, which meant Marcus had to stay home, which meant he texted his supervisor Kevin to say he'd be in after lunch, which meant he sat at the kitchen table for 4 hours with a bucket under the sink listening to water drip while Nadia was at school. He was glad to have the burst pipe. He understood that he was glad to have the burst pipe, and he understood what that meant, and he chose not to examine it. The second Tuesday, he had a work dinner. His company, a mid-sized logistics firm that moved freight between Ohio and the surrounding states, was hosting a client from Pittsburgh. Marcus had been told attendance was expected. He went. He sat through 2 hours of steak and small talk with a man named Dennis who had opinions about highway infrastructure, and he smiled and nodded and said absolutely 11 times, and he drove home at 10 at night thinking about nothing in particular, which was not nothing at all but was the closest he could get. The third Tuesday, he had no reason. He sat in his car in the parking lot of the Clover Ridge Community Center for 9 minutes. He had looked up the address 3 Sundays ago, typed it into his phone, and then moved the note into a folder he had labeled, with the specific cowardice of a man who could not admit what he was doing, Misk. The evening was cold. February in Columbus was the kind of cold that had no drama to it, just a flat gray weight that pressed down on everything. The parking lot had 6 cars in it. Inside, behind the glass doors, the lobby was lit with the warm yellow light of a building that had been heated for decades and would be heated for decades more regardless of who was inside it. He got out of the car. He walked to the door. He went inside. The woman at the front desk was young, probably mid-20s, and did not ask him any questions. She just smiled and said, "Room 112 is down the hall on the left," like she knew. Like anyone walking in alone on a Tuesday evening at 7:15 was either there for the grief group or the ceramics class, and he did not look like someone who worked with clay. He walked down the hall. He stood outside room 112. He could hear low voices inside, the kind of voices that happen in rooms where people have agreed to be honest, a specific sound. He had heard it once before from the doorway with a cupcake box and keys in his teeth. He opened the door and went in. The same folding chairs, the same wide circle, some of the same faces. He recognized the woman with gray hair, a young man in a blue jacket who had been crying last time and was not crying now, a heavy-set man in his 50s who had the particular stillness of someone who spent a great deal of energy being still, and Gerald, the old man with the reading glasses on the beaded chain. Gerald looked at him when he walked in and did not seem surprised at all. He nodded at an empty chair the way you nod at a chair for someone you were expecting. Marcus sat. He did not speak. Not that session, and not the next one either. He came the following Tuesday and the one after that. He sat and he listened and he said nothing, because he had been raised by a man who believed that the most useful thing you could do in an unfamiliar room was to watch and listen before you opened your mouth. His father had been right about very little, but he had been right about that. He listened to a retired teacher named Dorothy who was 73 and had been married for 41 years to a man named Harold, and who could no longer figure out how to buy groceries for one person. Every week she brought the same problem to the room. She kept buying 2 of everything, 2 yogurts, 2 apples, 2 of the small orange juice bottles Harold had liked. She could not stop her hands from reaching for 2. She laughed when she said it, but it was not a happy laugh. It was the laugh of someone who had realized that the body remembers what the mind is trying to forget. He listened to a young woman named Katie, 27, who had lost her mother 8 months ago and who kept buying her mother's brand of shampoo, not because she used it herself. She left the bottle in the shower unopened. She just needed to be able to smell it if she needed to. She said this plainly, without embarrassment, and no one in the room reacted with anything other than quiet recognition, which told Marcus that everyone in this circle had their own version of the unopened shampoo bottle, their own thing they kept buying, their own thing they could not stop their hands from reaching for. He listened to a man named Paul, 50s, whose son had died in an accident 3 years ago, and who came to this group not because it helped him feel better, but because, as he put it one evening in a voice as flat as road, "At least in here I don't have to explain why I'm not over it." Nobody said anything after Paul said that. Gerald let the silence sit for a full 15 seconds, Marcus counted. Then Gerald moved on, and the room breathed again, and Marcus understood something he had not understood before. This was what a room felt like when it was not trying to fix you. The 4th Tuesday, Gerald looked at Marcus during a pause in the circle and said, without warning or preamble, "Marcus, what do you miss most?" Marcus had been holding a paper coffee cup with both hands. He looked down at it. He had a prepared answer. He had prepared it 2 weeks ago when he first sat down in this circle, because he knew this question was coming, because it always came, because what else would you ask people in a room like this? He had planned to say something like, "Everything, I suppose," which was true, and also said nothing and would let him off the hook cleanly. He opened his mouth. He said, the way she laughed at things that weren't funny. He heard himself say it and kept going, because stopping now felt worse than continuing. She'd laugh at nothing. I'd wake up sometimes in the middle of the night and she'd already be laughing at something. In a dream, maybe, I don't know, she'd be laughing in her sleep and I'd lie there and think, what is so funny? What is that funny in a dream? And I never. He stopped. The paper cup was warm in his hands. I never found out what it was. The room was quiet in the specific way rooms go quiet when something true has been said in them. Gerald did not write anything down. He did not nod enthusiastically or say, "Thank you for sharing that." He just looked at Marcus for a moment the way a person looks at someone they have been waiting to hear from, and then he moved the circle gently forward to the next person. Marcus sat with his coffee cup and did not say anything else for the rest of the evening, but something in him had shifted, not fixed, not better, shifted the way a door that has been swollen shut for a long time shifts when the weather finally changes, not open, not yet, but no longer completely stuck. He drove home, paid the babysitter, a 16-year-old from down the street named Owen, who had done Nadia's homework with her, and left the kitchen in a better state than Marcus usually did. He checked on Nadia, who was asleep, certain as always. He stood in the kitchen and opened his phone and went to the folder labeled MISC and looked at the link for room 112. He moved it out of the MISC folder. He didn't give it a new folder name. He just let it sit on the main screen. That was enough for now. He went to bed. He lay on his side of the mattress. He thought about Claire laughing at something in a dream he could never see. He thought about Dorothy buying 2 yogurts. He thought about Katie's shampoo bottle. He did not feel better, but he felt less alone in not feeling better. And for the first time in 14 months, those were not the same thing. The Tuesday Marcus brought Nadia to the community center. He had not planned it. Her school had a staff development day. Owen had a dentist appointment. The one other person Marcus could have called, his sister Carol, who lived 20 minutes away, was visiting her in-laws and had been apologizing about it since the week before. Marcus had told her 3 times it was fine. He meant it, mostly. So he loaded Nadia into the car at 6:45, told her they were making a quick stop before dinner, and drove to Clover Ridge. She did not ask many questions. She was a child who had learned, somewhere in the last 14 months, to read the air in a room before deciding what to say. It was a thing that broke Marcus's heart quietly, the way the best and worst things did, without announcement, without drama, just a small, steady pressure behind the sternum that he carried everywhere. He stopped outside room 112. "I need to set up some chairs," he told her. "It won't take long." She looked at the door. "For what?" "A meeting." "You're meeting?" "Not exactly." Nadia considered this in the way she considered most things, thoroughly, without rushing. Then she said, "Okay," and walked through the door ahead of him. This had become Marcus's job over the past 3 weeks. Gerald had mentioned, after one of the Tuesday sessions, that the man who usually unlocked room 112 and set up the chairs before each meeting, a retired school janitor named Pete, who had been volunteering with the group for 6 years, was recovering from hip replacement surgery and would be out for at least a month. Gerald had said it the way he said most things, plainly, without pressure, as a fact waiting for someone to do something with it. Marcus had said, before Gerald finished the sentence, that he would do it. He had not planned to say that either. But he had been arriving early for the last 3 Tuesdays, unlocking the room with the spare key Gerald had pressed into his palm like it was nothing, like this was simply the next thing, and setting up the 12 chairs in the wide circle he had now memorized. He had also, without being asked, started making coffee in the small kitchen down the hall. He used the old drip machine that sat on the counter above a cabinet full of mismatched mugs, and the coffee was not good. It was the kind of coffee that existed to be warm and present rather than to be enjoyed, but people took it, and they held their cups the way he held his cup, and that was the point. Nadia walked into the room and looked around. "Just chairs," she said. "Just chairs." She set her backpack down near the wall and walked to the stack of folding chairs in the corner without being asked. She picked one up, carried it to the center of the room, and looked at him. "Where?" He showed her. She helped him. She was precise about it, measuring the gaps between chairs by eye, adjusting one that she felt was too close to another, standing back and checking the circle the way someone checks a painting they are hanging on a wall. He did not rush her. When they were done, she walked the inside of the circle once, slowly, like she was checking something he could not see. 13, she said. He counted. He had set out 13 chairs. He always set out 12. He started to move one back to the stack. Nadia said, "Leave it." He looked at her. "Someone might come," she said. She said it without looking at him, already walking back toward her backpack near the wall, matter of fact, like it was obvious. He left the chair. He went to the kitchen and made the coffee and came back, and Nadia sat against the wall with her homework spread across her lap, working through a page of long division with the focused calm she brought to math, which was her favorite subject. She did not look up when the first members started filtering in. She did not stare or fidget or do any of the things Marcus might have worried she would do. She just worked her division and let the room fill around her. Dorothy came in and spotted Nadia immediately and said, "Oh, who is this?" in the warm way of grandmothers everywhere, and Nadia looked up and said her name clearly and went back to her homework, and Dorothy looked at Marcus with an expression he did not have words for and then took her usual chair. Gerald came in last, as he always did. He looked at the circle, he looked at the 13th chair, he looked at Marcus. He said nothing. He sat down, put his reading glasses on, and opened the session. It went the way it always went, slowly, honestly, with the particular texture of a room full of people who had given up pretending. Paul talked about his son. Katie said she had finally used the last of the shampoo bottle and had not bought another one, and there was a round of quiet celebration for this that looked from the outside like nothing, but inside felt like something enormous. Dorothy said she had bought only one yogurt at the store this week. One. She had stood in the dairy aisle for a long time before she did it, and her hand had reached for two, and she had put one back. She said it the way someone announces that they have climbed a mountain nobody else can see. Marcus listened. He always listened more than he spoke. But that evening, near the end, a man who was new to the group, young, maybe 30, a first-timer still wearing his jacket like he might leave at any moment, said very quietly that he didn't understand how anyone in this room kept going. He said it genuinely, not as a complaint, as a real question: how do you keep going? The room was quiet for a moment. Marcus heard himself speak before he decided to. "You find the thing that still needs you," he said, "and you show up for it, even when you don't feel like it, especially when you don't feel like it." He felt Nadia look up from her homework. He did not look back at her. He kept his eyes on the young man in the jacket. "It's not about feeling better," he said. "It's about showing up. The feeling catches up eventually. Sometimes it doesn't, but you show up anyway." The young man in the jacket nodded, just once, but it was a real nod. Gerald looked at Marcus across the circle and said nothing. He didn't need to. After the session ended and the room began to empty, Gerald stayed behind. He always stayed behind. He was the kind of man who arrived first and left last and made it look effortless when Marcus suspected it was anything but. Marcus was folding chairs and stacking them when Gerald came to stand near him, not to help, just to stand near. "There's something I've been meaning to tell you," Gerald said. His voice was the same as always, unhurried, dry at the edges, the voice of someone who had learned that most things worth saying do not need to be said loudly. Marcus kept folding. "All right. When you walked in that first night with the cupcakes, the night I destroyed one of them on the floor." "Yes, that night," Gerald was quiet for a moment. "I recognized your last name." Marcus stopped folding. He stood there holding a folded chair. He looked at Gerald. "Webb," Gerald said, "Claire Webb." The chair in Marcus's hands was cold. Folding chairs were always cold. He had never noticed that before. "She sat in this room," Gerald said. "Years before you knew her, she was 23. She'd lost her father that spring, and someone pointed her here, and she came and sat in that circle for about 8 months. Marcus did not say anything. "She was quiet at first like you, watched the room before she spoke. Then one evening she said something that stayed with me for 15 years. She said that grief wasn't the opposite of love. She said it was what love turned into when it had nowhere left to go." Marcus set the folded chair down on the floor. He stood there. The room was almost empty now. Nadia was still against the wall, homework put away, looking at him with that careful watching look she had, the look she used when she was deciding whether to say something or whether to stay quiet. "She sat here," Marcus said. His voice was level. He made it level. "In this room, in these chairs." Gerald nodded. "I didn't say anything the night you walked in because I wasn't certain. Your last name is not an uncommon one, but after a few weeks I was certain. You have the same way of sitting in a room, like you're paying a debt to it by being present." Marcus looked at the chairs, the circle of them still half assembled, the 13th one that Nadia had said to leave. He thought about Claire at 23, which was 5 years before he met her. 23, and she had just lost her father, and she had walked into this room, and she had sat in a folding chair, and she had listened to people talk about grief, and eventually she had said something that Gerald had carried for 15 years. Grief wasn't the opposite of love. It was what love turned into when it had nowhere left to go. He had never heard her say that. He had known her for 9 years and she had never said that to him. Or maybe she had, in some other shape, in some other moment he hadn't had the ears to hear yet. "Did she ever come back?" Marcus asked. after she stopped coming. Gerald considered this. No, but the people who leave this room aren't the ones we worry about. They leave because they've found their feet again. They leave because they're ready. Marcus nodded. He looked at Nadia. She was watching him, that careful, measured look. He picked up the folding chair from the floor and carried it back to the stack in the corner. Then he stopped. He stood at the stack with the chair in his hands. He put it back on the floor. He carried it back to the circle. He set it down in the spot where Nadia had left the 13th chair. He did not explain this to Gerald. He did not explain it to himself. But the chair sat there in the circle next to the 12 others, and Marcus stood back and looked at it, and something in him that had been pulled tight for 14 months, not released, not resolved, just breathed. Nadia came to stand beside him. She looked at the circle of chairs. "Is this what Mom would have wanted for you?" she said. She did not ask it the way a child asks something. She asked it the way someone asks when they already half know the answer and just want to hear someone else say it. Marcus put his arm around her shoulders. He thought about Claire laughing in a dream he could not see. He thought about her at 23, sitting in this room, finding her feet. He thought about her saying that grief was what love turned into when it had nowhere to go. He thought about how love had gone somewhere then. It had come back around. It had found him in a wrong room on a Tuesday night with a box of cupcakes and car keys in his teeth. "Yeah," he said, "I think so." Nadia leaned against him. Outside, the parking lot was quiet. The February cold pressed flat against the windows. Inside the room, the chairs stood in their circle, warm from all the people who had sat in them. The 13th chair sat there too, waiting or simply present, in the way that the things that matter most are simply present without needing to announce themselves. Marcus turned off the light. He locked the door. He and Nadia walked down the hall together, past the coffee-smelling kitchen, past the front desk where the young woman was pulling on her coat, out through the glass doors and into the cold blue evening. He did not feel fixed. He did not feel like a man who had found an answer. He felt like a man who had finally walked into the right room, even though he had walked into it wrong, and was only now beginning to understand the difference. He buckled Nadia into her seat. He got in. He started the car. "Can we get dinner?" Nadia said. "Yeah, what do you want?" She thought about it for exactly 2 seconds. "Soup." "Soup it is." He pulled out of the parking lot. The road was empty and lit with orange streetlights, the kind that make everything look warmer than it is. He drove and Nadia sat quietly beside him, and between them was the particular silence of two people who have come through something they do not yet have words for and are not in a hurry to find them. He would come back next Tuesday. He already knew that. He would unlock the door, set out the chairs, make the bad coffee, and sit in the circle. He would listen more than he spoke, and when he spoke, he would try to say the thing that was true rather than the thing that was easy. He would leave the 13th chair. And somewhere in whatever way these things work, he believed that Claire would have found this funny in the best possible way, that her husband had walked into her old grief group by accident 14 years after she had sat there herself, and had found exactly what she had found, and had brought their daughter, who had her mother's way of standing in a room, into the same circle where her mother had once found her feet. He believed Claire would have laughed at that. He believed it would have been real. He drove. The soup place was 7 minutes away. Nadia hummed something quietly in the seat beside him, a fragment of the violin piece from the recital, and Marcus listened to it, and the evening settled around them the way evenings do when they are not pretending to be anything more than what they are. Just this. Just the road and the light and his daughter's voice, and the quiet understanding that some rooms you walk into wrong are the rooms you were always meant to find.